Welcome to the Credit Union Sales and Marketing Podcast. Your hosts, Bill McKenna, Paul Robert, and special guests discuss ideas for creating alignment in your sales and marketing efforts and ways to accelerate growth. Now let's get started.
Hey, Paul, we're back in the studio for another podcast today. How's your day going, my friend?
Terrific. No offense, Bill, but I'd rather be outside on the golf course because it's gorgeous here in Central Florida. But I love doing these podcasts with you. So good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's been beautiful here in the Northeast. It's been really great weather and enjoying some of the sunshine. I've been trying to get out myself, and my days have been so busy I haven't had a chance to do it, which is the bad news.
It's a good excuse for losing all those balls on the course, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I always tell people I combine my two favorite sports when I play golf. It's golf and fishing because I'm usually chasing the ball somewhere. If there's water, I'm going to find the water.
Yeah, fishing or hiking, hiking through the woods trying to find the ball.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, why is it, by the way, every time I get up in a golf course and I look at a lake between me and the next shot, somehow I go, I'm going to go in that lake.
It's psychological, isn't it, man?
Oh my goodness, it's terrible.
The game is up here. It's not in the hands or the swing. It's up there. So
yeah.
Hey, speaking of being up here, let's talk about some branding things that require, thinking it through and doing some research and figuring out, exactly what the brand needs to be.
Yeah, so we've been talking about that in the last bunch of episodes. We'll continue on, and we're going to have some guests on shortly, too, to talk about some of their experiences with brand and different things. But last episode, we talked about a couple of highlights, what the components of a brand, the benefits of a strong brand, the benefits to members. When does a new brand make sense? And we'll talk some more about that today. And also, we discussed the need for research when you're going into a brand.
Right.
What should you be looking at? What types of things should you do? And I know one of them we were really pretty pumped about was the fact that we have to get people from our organization involved early, right? To have some discussions. Make sure there's buy-in.
Well, make sure there's buy-in. Make sure there's excitement and enthusiasm around it. And, Bill, the other thing is I think when credit unions are thinking and talking about a brand change, sometimes the mindset needs to be around, why are we doing it? Why do we need to do it? Why do we need to do it now? And so forth. And so, I don't think it's a one-way street. I don't think it's, let's change our brand and boom, we're going to do it. I think there has to be a real process of checkpoints along the way to make sure we're doing it for the right reasons and we got the right buy-in and involvement, especially of the board and the employees like you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there because there is a process of this. This isn't like one day it's done.
Right.
It's an ongoing process. It's going to be tweaked. It's going to be something that takes a while. And honestly, I think most of the clients I've worked with over the years, and you're probably the same, the process does take time. It's not a quick process. You have to think it through properly.
Got one chance to do it right. And so more often than not, 4 out of 5 times, that takes time. So take your time. Sure. Don't rush through it. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk about, kind of that, the name and how we need to decide the name and how important the name is, Bill.
Yeah. So a couple points on that we've been talking about would be, does your name work? Is it a good name? Is it working currently for where you want to go in the future, or depending on who your group is, is it establishing brand equity? Is that name good? Does it have brand equity, or do you need to establish some new brand equity? Positioning, negative perceptions, positive, negative perceptions, and some of that repositioning that may be required as part of why we're doing this whole renaming, right? So,
right.
Both of us have been involved with quite a few credit unions over the years that have been through the process of naming, whether we've done it or someone else has.
Right. Yep.
We've jumped in sometimes after it was done by someone else, and we're trying to help them to really create a better position for that. So, one client that I worked with a while back was a smaller credit. As a matter of fact, when I started working with them, they were like, I think 21 million in assets or something. They were really tiny, and they were called Wilkes-Barre Belco Credit Union. Well, that Belco name, as you know, a lot of the
Telephone.
telecommunication, right?
Right.
So we worked on a name change, and we came up with Choice One Federal Credit Union, which I still use today. How about in your case? Do you have somebody that you might have worked with in a similar situation?
Well, certainly a lot of those where they moved away from an original seg, and a lot of times it's okay. We're a community. We have a community charter now. Therefore, we need to appeal to a broader market, and the name is holding us back. And so, more often than not, it seems like that's been the predominant driver. But we had another one a year or so ago, Bill, that I thought was interesting. I hadn't encountered it previously. It was on Long Island, and they went through the whole research like you're talking about here, and what they concluded was their name was still good. They simply dropped the word federal from the credit union part of it. And because they found that the word federal conjured up this idea that you had to be a federal government employee in order to join the credit union. And I had never really thought about that before, but that's an interesting approach, and it gave them an opportunity to refresh their brand and really go to market with something new and different, even though all they did was drop the name or the word federal from their name.
Yeah. And in that case, the name Suffolk, certainly a region within Long Island, and
right.
and that's certainly something that resonates with the people there. So there's really no reason to totally get rid of it.
And that's an interesting point, because we talked about how if your name ties you to the seg, that could be a problem. And let's be honest, in 2024, more often than not, it is a problem. But if the name ties you to a region or the community or a movement or something along those lines, now that's a different story, because that's more universal, right? All people can get behind that. So it's just interesting that Suffolk, as you mentioned, is a region. And why would we want to change that? We're part of this community. Let's continue to emphasize that.
Yeah, it gets to the point of what makes sense. And it is interesting because a lot of credit unions you see today that have had a particular name, whether it's a seg-based name or community-based name, sometimes they'll come up with some names that are really very different. Very different. Yeah. Something that you look at and you almost don't know how to pronounce it sometimes. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And so, although that's moving away far from something, but is it too far?
Yeah. Is that a good thing, Bill, that the name is, on the surface at least, is you can't determine what it means or indescribable? Is that a good thing, do you think?
I don't know. I think if you're going to do that, you have to be prepared to do a really interesting brand launch about who you are. You have to do a lot with your existing members to let them know you're still the same people.
Yeah.
You're still the same people behind the doors. So that becomes really a marketing issue as well, right? There's a lot of work involved in doing that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because sometimes people say, we just can't be associated here anymore because it is holding us back.
Agree.
But there's a lot more work into that than just putting a new name out there, because all of a sudden people are like, who is this? Who are these people?
I just know that I've had a lot of conversations with CEOs who have said, what the heck is that? We were talking about a credit union, and by the way, it's not just credit unions. I mean, there are lots of companies across all industries that have changed their name, and it's like, what the heck does that mean? I can't even pronounce it, or much less spell it. So,
yeah,
I think it depends, of course, on the situation, but the challenge is that a good thing or not to have an innocuous name like that?
Yeah, we're digging in deep here to some name stuff, but I think it's worth the time that we're spending, because let me say, there are some excellent branding companies out in the industry, in the banking and credit union space, that do amazing work. Honestly, they do. And I know they spend a lot of time on the research of those names that they're coming up with. And some of them, like you said, are a little different, a little out of the box. Right. And I work with a credit union down in Florida, for instance, that is Jack's Federal Credit Union, which was originally a base down
Air
there,
Force
and
Base, right?
right, exactly, and now they're Ratify.
Hmm.
And I know when they did their branding that they spent a lot of time, and honestly, they have a very fresh, and their brand guide is really wonderfully done. The companies that did it did a great job on it. So I'm not
Hmm.
saying there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I will say this also, that type of a brand change, that type of engagement is going to be a lot more expensive. And I'm not saying it's not worth spending the money. Don't get me wrong. But understand, just like many things in life, there's different levels of what you're going to do and how you're going to go about it.
Yeah.
So it's not something to be taken lightly. And it in their case, they knew it was time to move away from that, move in a good direction. And honestly, it's performing well for them. So
Yeah. Hey, let's go back to something I referenced, which was the single seg and changing your name to move away from that single seg. I was just with a credit union this week in Michigan, and that has been their challenge, their discussion, if you will. But you know what, Bill? The board is still predominantly retirees of that single seg. And they have an affinity to the name and they don't want to change the name. They don't want to lose that tie to the single seg. So pretty much whatever the CEO says, they're going to say, nope, we're keeping that name. I'm sure you run across that a lot. How do you navigate those waters? Because there's a lot of credit unions out there that still have that seg name, don't they?
they do. And it is an issue that comes up pretty much continually across the industry, and it has to do with just, are you going to be dedicated to moving forward to the next level and what do you have to do to make it happen? And sometimes people have to give that up. They just have to say, we have to do this.
Yeah.
But you know what? Ultimately, if I'm working with a client and that client is going to make a decision, I'm going to have so much control. And after that, it's up to them to decide what they're going to do and where they're going to spend their money. I'll do the very best I can for that client.
Right.
But the truth is, sometimes we have to, as consultants, Paul, I think we are obligated to tell the client, here's what I think you should do.
The old adage is true. You can lead a horse to water, but I can beg and plead and cajole all I want. But if they're not going to change their name at the end of the day, it's their decision. It's their credit union. So, you got to live with that.
Yeah, I have a presentation. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to ask a question. So go ahead if you were going to add on to that.
No, I just said I have a presentation I do a lot these days. It's called Obstacles to Growth. And I bring those 8 obstacles up. There's a bunch of obstacles, but honestly, if a credit union identifies an obstacle and they're not willing to address that obstacle, then it's going to hold them back.
Right. So the question I was going to ask, which I think is in that same vein of topic, is my feeling, Bill, has been that, okay, regardless of what the name is, whether we change it to something that you can't pronounce, or we keep it as the seg name, when you're talking about the brand, it's what you do around the name that makes the difference. The name is one thing. It's an ingredient in the recipe, no question. But what's really important are the other ingredients to the recipe. It looks like you agree with that. Your head's nodding. You approach it the same way, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I think that you can take almost anything and build brand around it and build, the positioning around it, which is actually the next step we're going to talk about in just a minute. So we could probably it's interesting because a lot of these cross over, right?
Yeah.
But that's the positioning. That's the brand, the brand deliverables. That's the training parts, right? Yep. So let's jump right into that. Step 3, which kind of aligns with it. And let's talk about it for a second.
Sure.
So when you talk about a name, you were right. You have to be able to take that name. You have to then be able to communicate what makes you different, makes it about build positioning around that name. And so when you talk about positioning, what is positioning? What isn't positioning? Why does it matter?
Right.
And, like you just mentioned, not forgetting the past, you have to figure out how to build a brand position around that name you have.
Absolutely.
So,
Yep.
Paul, you do something which I think is interesting called the brand camp.
Right.
And I'd be interested to hear a little bit, and I'm sure our listeners would, about how that works. And, what are some of the elements you talk about in a brand camp, and why is that important?
Yeah, sure. And I'm not trying to sell it here. It's just a process that we've kind of learned to work through with clients to get the most out of their brand. But when you think about brand camp, Bill, start at the end, okay? At the end of all of this process, we want two things, right? We want our employees, and then by extension, of course, our members in the community, to be excited about the direction that we're going to whatever our focus is with the brand, whether it's new direction, let's get excited about that, whether it's really being proud of our heritage, let's get them excited about that. But whatever it is, whatever that focus is, the first thing that we want to accomplish with Brand Camp is to get people excited and motivated about our brand. All right. The second thing is, the age-old question of what's in it for me. We've got to be able to explain that and explain it clearly and concisely, and again, in a motivational way. So let's start with the employees, right? We not only want to get the employees excited and motivated about our new brand, but they need to know how to live our new brand and how their actions and their behaviors and even their words substantiate our brand. And so that's a really critical part of Brand Camp. I'll give you a quick example. We had a client not too long ago where it wasn't in their name, but one of their new core values incorporated the word respect. Okay. Well, Bill, you know as well as I that if you ask 10 people, how do you show respect to someone else? You're probably going to get 10 different answers, right?
Absolutely.
So we needed to get consensus on what does showing respect mean to our credit union. And then that's how the employees need to behave, if you will, perform going forward with their members. So that's another way is how do you live it? And then for the members, what does this mean for them? What's different? What's going to be different for them in terms of their experiences with us, in terms of their interactions with us? What's going to be different? And again, make that as exciting and motivational as we possibly can make it. So that's what we focus on in Brand Camp in a nutshell.
That's good. Yeah. And I know you focus a lot more as we've worked together over the years. You focus a lot more on those pieces of it, those internal pieces with the employees, where I tend to have a little bit more of a focus in the visual part and the marketing execution of those things, right?
Right.
We have our little lanes that we run in. So one of the other things you talk about quite often, if I'm not mistaken, and where does it play into the whole mission, the vision, the values? How does that all tie together?
That really is where it starts, because, that's, and as a quick aside, I guess, that's what we're finding, Bill, gets people excited nowadays, is having that emotional attachment to not just a brand, but the culture, the organization, and of course, the people within the organization. So, if a credit union has mission, vision, values, great. Let's make sure that they're, still applicable, that they are still, appealing and motivational to employees and members. But a lot of times it just requires two things: refreshing it, maybe modernizing it a little bit, tweaking it a little bit, if you will. It's gotten stale, so to speak. The second thing is we got to make it, we got to tie it into their strategy and make sure there's alignment with what they're actually doing day in and day out to grow and to serve members. Sometimes we talk about doing one thing in our mission, vision, and values, but in terms of our delivery, we're doing something a little different. So a lot of times let's just synergize those things and make sure that there's this harmonious blend around mission, vision, values, our brand, and our delivery, what we're doing either at a strategic and or a tactical level.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that I've seen in the past is I'll use myself as an example. I work with a client, I'll come up with a new look and feel, a visual brand, some of the pieces. I'll even come up with, work some ideas about deliverables and positioning statements and slogans and taglines and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I'll get it all done, present them with a brand guide, say, here's what you're supposed to do with this, guys. And then when you walk away from that engagement, they lose the follow through.
Yeah.
They lose the follow through. And what I love about what you do with them is you help them with the follow through because, hey, organizations can do some of this on their own, sort of,
Absolutely.
And it depends on the depth of the knowledge of the internal people they have too. The
Right.
skill sets, are they experienced with this? It depends a lot upon the size of the credit union, but the follow through, the accountability is so important in this, isn't it?
It is. It's not, taking your foot off the gas. It's keeping the focus. And, Bill, that doesn't have to be rocket science. Accountability a lot of times is just in your Monday morning huddles, referencing it or maybe introducing a new twist on things just to refocus people back to our new brand or our new slogan or even our new colors. I wanted to jump in earlier, Bill, because even if you just change colors, that can be a conversation starter. There's probably a reason behind that color you chose. Well, let me tell you, why we chose that color purple or that color green or whatever the case may be. So there's value in continuing to maintain the focus, holding people accountable to living that new brand, whether it's a full-blown rebrand or maybe just a tweak or a modification.
Yeah, right. And the reasoning behind it. So some of the things that, we're trying to do through this whole process is, let people know what makes us different, right? Why are we different?
Right.
Why do we stand out? How do we compare to our competition? What's our competition look like? And certainly when we do this type of work, we're going to be looking at competition, who's in our markets and who we feel like we're competing with. Although, of course, we're competing with worldwide companies today. Why would people choose us? That's what we're trying to. Why would you work with us compared to someone else? What do they already know about your brand? What do they, your members, what do they know about you? What is the perceptions they have of you? But also the community, what do or don't they know about you? And then positioning, the slogan, and then, it's all about all of this we're talking about has to do with execution, right? It all has to do with getting it done, getting it out the door, making something that can be used. And again, I'll touch back on the follow through. This is not a short-term, 3 months, 6 month. This is an ongoing thing that constantly has to be worked. Every new employee has to learn about it.
Yeah. Good point. Hey, and we're running a little bit long here, Bill, but let's maybe in future podcasts, let's take a deeper dive into some of these things because you're absolutely right about accountability and keeping the focus. You're absolutely right about the need to explain it and position it properly. I think another one would be differentiation. There's a lot you can do around differentiation. I used to ask that question all the time, still do, but not in the same context, around what makes us different. And, you ask a teller that versus a CEO versus a board member, man, it can be all over the board. And the more we can tighten that up, the better. So let's add that to our list for a future podcast.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we'll dig in as part of step 4 into some of that value proposition, some of the things like that. So, hey, good talking with you today, Paul. We'll get together again and we'll follow up on the next one.
And I'm heading to the golf course. I'll see you later.
Good buddy. For you. Keep hit them straight and keep them out of the water.